Hi, thanks for joining us today. I'm your host, Nicole.
And I'm your host, Jacqueline. You're listening to the second season of Perfictionist. So on this week's episode, we'll be discussing Poison Princess by Kresley Cole. Kresley Cole is known for her work and her best-selling series. It's a paranormal series called Immortals After Dark, which features supernatural creatures such as vampires, werewolves, and witches engaged in passionate and adventurous romances. Cole's writing is celebrated for its captivating storytelling, intricate world building, and steamy romantic encounters.
And you've read quite a few of her works, haven't you?
Yes, I think I've read all of them, except for the two in the series that we're currently working on. Day Zero, I haven't read, and neither have I read the final book, From the Grave. But I've read all of the other ones. And yeah, it is Immortals After Dark is a very large series, and it's an ongoing series. And yeah, like it'll be more than 20 books, by the time it's done. I wonder if it'll even go into the 30s. That would be cool.
And is it following the same characters, or is that one kind of more just a variety of different characters that you meet along the way?
Yeah, so each book is focused on a different couple, and each book is their I want to say love story, but it's a fated mate situation. So each book is a fated mate pair or whatever, but they're all intertwined. All of their lives are intertwined. I don't want to give away too much, and yeah, it's really, really good series. I highly recommend people read it.
I've started collecting some. I don't have the first one yet, so I want to read them in order.
Yeah,
but I've started my collection.
Yes.
But for this episode, we are focusing on her young adult series because the rest of her series are all adults.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And so the Arcana Chronicles is her one young adult series. And we're starting with Poison Princess, which is the first book in the Arcana Chronicles, which is a post-apocalyptic young adult fantasy series. But even though it is young adult, I would say it very much lends itself to an adult audience as well.
Oh, totally. Yeah. In this episode, we will be discussing various events that happen throughout Poison Princess, but we won't be providing an in-depth plot analysis like how we did for season 1 with Throne of Glass. We were very much chronologically in season 1 kind of going through important aspects that happened through each book. And some of those episodes, I believe we even had a couple that were over 2 hours long.
Yes.
And so, yeah. So to kind of shorten episodes, because obviously that's a very long time for somebody to be listening to an episode, we decided to kind of change how we're doing things this time. We're going to instead highly recommend reading Poison Princess before listening to this very spoiler-filled episode.
In Poison Princess, we are introduced to Evangeline Green. On Evie's 16th birthday, a catastrophic event called the Flash destroys all organic matter and all bodies of water evaporate. Earth was transformed into a desert wasteland overnight. Evie is paired with an unlikely ally as she tries to survive the new world, all while discovering there may be more to her than she ever knew.
When the Flash happens, they were kind of describing these really beautiful lights were in the sky. And that was kind of preceding the Flash event, right? So although I know that obviously it probably wasn't a scientific event that was occurring necessarily, my immediate thought was that it was a massive solar flare from the sun. So if you don't know what a solar flare is, it's a sudden and intense eruption of energy from the sun's surface. It releases a burst of electromagnetic radiation across the electromagnetic spectrum, and it just hauls out in whatever direction that the burst was in. So if it collides into us, Earth, we often that's how northern lights or aurora borealis is caused. In my career, we had to learn a lot about this in order to capture them, right?
Yeah.
So if the flares are big enough, they can cause disruptions to satellite communications, power grids, radio transmissions. But if you can imagine like a catastrophically huge solar flare, it would, cause a cataclysmic apocalyptic event on Earth.
Yeah, that completely makes sense. Now that you've kind of described it in like a scientific term of like, what if this event happened, how would we describe it scientifically? Like, what is most likely to have happened? That makes complete sense.
And I mean, this is not a spoiler because we actually, at where we have even gotten up to reading, and even like you or myself, I haven't read the final book yet. And I don't know that we'll get more information on that. We just know that it happened and therefore these events are happening. But I don't think it is scientific like what I just mentioned. But that was it. Now I can't say my theory because I don't want to give spoilers.
What we do know about the Flash within the story is that it like created all these creatures, and the one that's like the most, well, I guess it didn't create a bunch of creatures. It created one creature in particular that was very interesting because it's like a zombie and a vampire had a baby, and they're called bagmen.
Yeah.
Beggars. And I thought that was a really cool, because we get a lot of, in the supernatural kind of stories, you get a lot of zombies, you get a lot of vampires, and this is a little hybrid. And I was like, oh, look at this little creature, this nasty little thing.
Yeah. Yeah, they're described so gross too. Like they sound so disgusting.
Yeah, like the kind of like moistness. Sorry.
Yeah. Sorry, everybody. Yeah.
But it has to be said. Like that is like that word, how you're feeling right now, that is embodies their body.
Yes.
But yeah, they were like created somehow from the Flash. So these creatures didn't exist before, but after the Flash, they all of a sudden were thriving, and they are like zombie creatures, but they drink blood because they're like thirsting for water. And at first you think it's like, oh, they're drinking blood because all the water has evaporated. But then at some point later on, it could be a mild spoiler, but it's not that big of a deal.
No.
It's known that they're craving the blood. They prefer the blood over water if they have a choice of either.
Yeah. I don't think that's mentioned in Poison Princess, but it doesn't necessarily change the dynamic between people and bagmen. Like either way, whenever a bagman sees a person, he's like, I must drink your blood.
Yeah. And it's like, if you get bit by them and survive, then you turn into a bagman, like the zombie.
Or it's like a virus or something, or who knows. Like, again, here I'm trying to like make it scientific and make it make sense, but yeah.
So I thought that was an interesting kind of creature to come out of the Flash.
Yeah. As if the Flash isn't horrific enough, right?
And there's a few other kind of strange things. For some reason, women are affected more. And do you, like, without telling us what the answer is, do you eventually find out? Or have you gotten to a point in the story where that is explained?
I am still mystified by that. Yeah. All we know is that women were more impacted, and so therefore they are a rare and a commodity, and they're very, very valuable in after the Flash, which makes life much more dangerous for women.
Yeah. No, it's very interesting, and I hope that we get answers at some point. If not, we might have to scour the internet to see if anyone has theories on that. If anyone has theories without like spoiling anything, let us know, because this is the one thing that I keep going back to, like, why the women? And because it becomes like a pretty big plot point in not really, but it's like, I guess, a side plot point of always coming back to the women being a commodity. And I wonder if that is going to become a greater message or theme that is being, like, is this being used to discuss a bigger issue?
Right. Okay. I have a thought about that, but I'm not too sure if it would be a spoiler, so I'm just going to hold tight for now. So the prologue.
This book starts off with like a bang. I read the prologue. I was like, okay, I'm going to be reading this book. So I wasn't ready to like start reading the book, but I was like, I'll just read the prologue. It has a prologue. I'll just get a little taste. And I read the prologue and I was like, oh my gosh, I need to read this book. It was just so gripping. Like it is probably the best prologue I have ever read.
That's awesome. Yeah, well, Kresley's writing is like that. So yeah, I'm really excited for you to jump into her other series because they're all gripping like that.
You get jumped in at a part that is just so tantalizing, and you're like, I need to know what happens. And at some points, you kind of jump back to that point.
Yeah.
Because it is a story. In the prologue, we find out that it is a story being told. So the entire book is someone telling the story up until the point of the prologue. Yes. So you do get tiny little flashbacks to kind of keep you excited because the tone and the setting and everything shifts when you jump into chapter 1. Yeah. It's like a very different world. Yes. The prologue versus chapter 1.
Yes.
It's jarring.
So, but then you're like, wait.
Mm-hmm. You're like, how? How does it get from here to here? I
must read more. Yeah. Yeah.
Because it's so different. You're like, how in one book, how do we get from prologue to
how could it have gone from that to that? Right?
Yeah. I do know that some people were, or at least I've read some reviews, and some people were very upset by that. Because the book itself covers 252 days, which is around 8 months. And it's like you have this intense prologue, and then you jump back in time 8 months, and all of a sudden it's like Evie's heading to high school, and you're like, okay, sorry, what? Like after you read the prologue, to jump into like high school of this like popular, rich, pretty girl getting ready for her like first day of grade 12. I think that's where she's at in school, and you're just like, I'm sorry, what's happening? And it kind of stays that way for like maybe the first 10 to 12 chapters. You're just reading about a girl in high school, and you're like, did I just jump into Sweet Valley High? Like, what's going on here? And I think some people were upset by that. But I think my personal opinion is that it is necessary to understand Evie in that setting, to understand her growth.
It is. And Jack, because it's laying the foundation for who she is and where she's at in life, and how that's going to affect how she behaves and what her decisions are in the future when faced with like nearly impossible odds, right? And Jack, he's at a very different, he lives in a different world altogether from Evie, even before the Flash. And then we also learn again, like how that affects the decisions he makes and how he behaves after they're faced with the Flash. And I think it's extremely important to lay that foundation for the rest of the story. And it is a very small piece of the story. So, I think it needs to happen, because if not, if we started at the Flash, we wouldn't get a sense of who these people were before. And I think that would also take away some of the, like, I can relate with this, because, like we all knew someone like Evie's best friend Mel, or you knew of someone like her, and stuff like that. And just even the idea that, she has this home that she loves, and like, although like you and I, we live in a very different place compared to where it began in the book, you do get that sense of like home and roots, right?
Yes.
So and there's a sense of familiarity with the whole high school thing. Like most people in North America at least do that, So I think that's extremely important, even so you have something to relate to. Otherwise, it's just a bit like, oh, okay, this is there'd be so much less depth without those chapters.
I 100% agree. And I think also like rounding the fact that she is a 16-year-old girl who 8 months ago was in high school, and now she's in the middle of an apocalypse doing these intense things, like in intense situations, fighting for her actual life.
Yeah.
it's like, you need to remember she's 16 years old. Like,
she's
she is
just
just
a
a little
kid.
baby.
She's a kid. Yeah.
And I think so,
Exactly.
like, people often, I think, forget characters and like expect them to behave in unrealistic ways, which, like, yeah, they're characters, they're not real people, but she is still 16, so we have to understand that she has a brain of a 16-year-old.
Exactly. And I think, like, because I have seen online too, like, people are kind of hard on Evie's character, can be. Not everybody, but some people can be. And I think it's also funny because then on the other side of that, you get people who kind of, rib or joke around about how, like, oh, in these books, it's always like a post-apocalyptic, it's a female main character. She's beautiful. She's fragile, but also strong. And it's almost like a trope, right? But with Evie, she's sort of outside of that trope because she does have some pretty good flaws, but she's also very, very, like, I think quite wise for her age, considering her age right now. If she was like a 35-year-old woman, we'd be like, girl.
Yeah. Questioning some of these decisions.
Yeah. But she's 16. And so I think, considering that she's a 16-year-old girl who, I think she's doing pretty good.
Yeah. I can't imagine myself at 16 being put in that situation. I'm sure I'd make much worse decisions.
And she's very careful about her, like, her character. She's very, like, even though she's in this post-apocalyptic situation, she's still thinking very carefully about when she wants to lose her virginity and stuff like that. She's not just jumping into anything without thinking. And I think as a 16-year-old girl, that's like a pretty admirable quality. Sorry, I want to clarify. Like, I'm not saying y'all need to be virgins at 16. I'm not saying that. That's not what I mean. I mean, she's being thoughtful about decisions that she's making that she knows will impact her in some way.
Even though, like, there's probably other things that maybe are more important to think about when you're in an apocalypse. It's like, but that is still something she has to live with. Like, any decision she makes about herself and her body, that's something she has to live with forever. So it's like, yes, maybe in a life and death situation that doesn't seem important, it's like, but it still is, because, like, mentally that decision will,
affect
however
her.
You choose to handle it, it'll affect her. Exactly. And kind of talking about her, like, mental well-being and mental health, she at the beginning was in a mental health facility. I can't remember exactly what it was called, but she was sent there because she was having hallucinations and she was being reprogrammed. And that was, like, a huge part of her story too. Like, this part, like, the fact that, because we go from a very realistic, real world, she's going to high school, she's experiencing these hallucinations and then drawing out her, like, visions, and then ends up going to this facility. It's like, that is like, we needed to have that part too. Like, so to have this background of her story, like, without this piece and her grappling with her mental state, it completely would have changed how we view Evie.
Well, absolutely. And also it's incredibly important to the plot as well. We needed that for the plot. So, if we had jumped in right at the flash and we didn't know she'd been having these hallucinations, it would have been more like what's going on? I have no idea what's going on. Oh my gosh, I have these superpowers. You would almost have to assume that the Flash gave her those powers without that backstory, right? So, like, it's extremely important to the overall plot, like the overall, like, underlying thing of the entire series. So I'd have to super duper disagree with people who don't enjoy those chapters. Sorry that you didn't enjoy them, but they're necessary and they're included for a reason.
Yeah. No, I completely agree that this story just simply wouldn't make sense. And I don't think, like, major events that happen, specifically with Evie's, like, transformation at the end of this book, it just comes together so nicely.
Yeah, it does. So again, like, going along that mental health vein that we were in, Jack has a drinking problem. He's got a major drinking problem. And
yes.
when I first read the series, I was a little bit younger, and I remember thinking like, oh yeah, he's got a drinking problem. He's a rough and tumble guy. He had a rough upbringing. But now, like, coming from a place where, you know, I'm older now, I'm looking at Jack and going, my God, like, he is so young to be an alcoholic.
I was 100% in denial about the fact that he was an actual alcoholic.
Yeah.
All throughout Poison Princess, I was like, oh, it's not actually alcohol he's drinking. Because one, he's literally drinking out of a flask at school. I'm like, I'm sorry, where are your teachers?
Yeah.
How is he just in the hallway taking sips, in the classroom, like sipping it back? Like, who's monitoring this situation? So for that, I was like, oh, it must not actually be alcohol. He must just like be like, oh, it's cool to carry a flask. And then I was like, oh no, it has to do with like, he's special too, like Evie, because we know Evie's special. We just don't know why or how. But she has these, you know, these visions and this stuff that's going on. And we're like, it's kind of like at the beginning, you're like, is it real? Is it in her head? Like you are left with that kind of like question of like, what is actually going on?
Right. Yeah.
And so I was convinced that Jack didn't actually have a drinking problem, that he was drinking something to suppress his own. Like, I thought he also had hallucinations and was like suppressing them and like kind of made an elixir.
Okay. Yeah.
That is completely wrong.
But do we know that though?
I mean, I feel as though once we get to know Jack more and his backstory more, it is more alluded to that is a coping mechanism like a coping mechanism for his past rather than a supernatural ability.
His very rough and abusive upbringing. Yeah.
But I mean, I feel as though I'm discovering anything could be possible in this book. So
yeah,
jury's out on whether or not the drinking has more to do with something supernatural or otherwise. Yes. Or if it has to do with like his very human, very real traumatic upbringing.
Right.
Do you feel as though Evie and Jack are trauma bonded?
Oh, 100%. 100%. Yeah, absolutely. I think, yeah, like they have to be in a way. But I think that that's sort of almost, you know, if that's true, maybe we're wrong, you know, Kresley, are they trauma bonded? No, like, I think definitely like that would, but it would be beneficial because it helps like in this particular situation. Because can you imagine trying to survive the Flash by yourself and being out there, like, and Evie too, like, especially before she kind of learns she's got like these powers, right? Just being like, what's real? What isn't real? Like she would be in a really bad position, like, you know, like with her mom and what happened to her mom and stuff. Because if it wasn't for Jack, the AZ would have just come and got them.
Yeah. No, I'm just because I guess it speaks more to like the progression of their relationship as the story continues. But I found it interesting that like just like everything they've gone through and like where their relationship ends up going.
So are you saying you're wondering if like the only reason they kind of fell in love is because of a trauma bond?
Yeah. I don't think that's necessarily true, but I'm wondering how much of a role it plays in it.
I think oh yeah. Yeah, I was actually going to say, I think Jack kind of fell in infatuation with Evie when he saw her in the convertible with Brandon. But then again, we then learn more about Jack's past and find out, something else. So,
Their relationship is complicated, to say the least.
Yeah, it is.
Near the end of the book, we finally get back to kind of where the prologue happens. And Evie ends up having this major, major transformation, which was just like so awesome. But she's like seeing the Red Witch. And she's like kind of starting to question like, who is this Red Witch? Like in her visions that we've been talking about. And my first reaction was like, is this some sort of like doppelganger situation, kind of like Vampire Diaries with like Elena and Catherine?
Yeah.
Like, I was like, that's the vibe I was getting, was like that there were like, yeah, doppelgangers.
Yeah.
Was that, did you have any theories?
I can remember when I first read it, and the Red Witch thing, to me, it was very obvious that it was her power that was rising up. But putting yourself in Evie's shoes for a second, if you were having these visions, and you'd be like, you would not want to think that that was you somehow, right? Like, you would not want to be like, oh my gosh, I am like this completely sadistic murderer, this like super creepy, like vine wielding, like, you know what I mean? Like you would be in denial too. So
yeah,
to me, it was obvious that it was like just her power. But the way that Evie refers to the Red Witch is very much a separate entity of herself.
Yeah, no, completely. It's like she's like a Jekyll and Hyde situation almost.
Well, I think it's really interesting that because at the end of the book, when she kind of unleashes the Red Witch, right? What a epic, like very, very gory, but what an epic, like the way she tore the hermit apart, Arthur apart, right? That's pretty gory.
Yeah, it was visually like appealing in the sense that the story itself was really like coming alive, but also at the same time very visually grotesque.
Yeah, but
so
like
depending on
but after having known like what he was, a serial killer, that was very satisfying, because
yes, I absolutely had no love lost for the hermit. Like I was
like it was like you're fully like, yeah, Evie, like yes, it was very satisfying.
Then when Jack like saw her like that, it's like, oh, is he gonna be able to?
You know how I imagined it if they ever made this into like a show adaptation, was like she's standing there on the porch and like, you know, the vines, and then it tears, and like you can see his body, and then it tears him apart, and it's almost like the way that I imagined it was like it tears him apart stringy, but it's out of focus, and as her vines like reveal, it's Jack standing there with his shocked look on his face. That's how I was picturing it. I was like, that'd be really cool.
At one point, they were going to make this into either a movie series or a TV series. Like the rights were bought for that to happen in like 2015 or something.
Oh, really?
But it never happened.
Oh, come on. It would be so good. It's such a cool concept. It's so different.
It would be nice to see it come to life.
I actually bought the tarot card deck that I looked it up. There is, for those of you who don't know and who are fans of Kresley Cole, there is a really good Facebook group called Kresley Cole After Dark. And it is run by Kresley Cole's, I think she's her assistant. And so you can actually like post things. They all go through Naomi. She is like the moderator of the group. And so she, you know, she will or will not allow the post. But you can actually ask questions, and she will do her best to get you those answers. And so if you guys are huge fans of Kresley Cole but don't know about that group, check it out, because it is awesome. We will provide the link to it in our show notes, and or if you're on YouTube, in the description.
At the very end, if I'm remembering it correctly, we do find out that the whole tarot thing, as you mentioned, like you bought the tarot card deck, and it's because each of the, well, not everyone in the story, but there are characters in the story who represent the tarot cards, and Evie, in her transformation, is revealed to be the Empress, which you kind of obviously suspect along the way, but it's like, no, she is.
So apparently Kresley used the Rider-Waite tarot deck as just like inspiration. So it's not like strictly conforming to it. But if you're curious, that is the deck that she used for inspiration. So I purchased a deck so I could have a close look at each of the cards. And it is so interesting looking at, because, you know, it is mentioned that their tableau kind of comes up and flashes above them and shows each time a major arcana comes across another major arcana, and they see the tableau. And so I was kind of picturing like, you know, the cards that are actually in that tarot deck, because there's quite a few different tarot decks out there. Yeah.
I feel as though this is one of the original kind of iterations of the tarot.
Yes. So there's the trump cards, which are the major arcana cards, and then there's the minors. And so the minors are mentioned, like the cups, the swords, the pentacles. They're kind of like mentioned in the story. Whether they're going to play a more significant part or not, we have yet to find out. So should we talk about the rules of the game that we sort of kind of know at this point?
Well, I think at this point we know that it is a game that is being played. So each of the major, so all the major arcana cards are represented by a teenager. So we know that it's always like a teenager, and that it is a sort of fight to the death situation that happens cyclically, but with thousands of years in between.
Yes. And there's always some kind of large cataclysmic sort of event that precedes them to honor a particular card. So if we're thinking about the Flash, we, again, don't know the story's reason for the Flash yet. I gave like a potential reason. If it was a solar flare, so to speak, maybe it was in honor of the sun card.
Is there also a star card, or is it just a sun card?
Yeah, there's a star card, I think. Yeah.
So I guess it could be either, because the sun is technically a star.
That's true. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, and then each of the arcana have some sort of power. Some of the powers seem to overlap. Some of them are very unique to the specific card. And the powers that I guess Kresley has kind of given each of the characters, I think, are also kind of reminiscent of, like, if you look on the card, the powers make sense to the imagery on the cards, which is really cool.
You can see where she took inspiration from the cards for the powers. So that's, it's kind of cool.
And then I think some of them are just like regular, healing powers, strength, speed, typical powers you would find in people who are superhuman or supernatural. Yeah.
It sort of seems like they have, well, not all of them have, because Evie does not seem to have super strength or super endurance or anything like that, does she? Like, she struggles physically trying to keep up with Jack. The moon card, who we meet in this book, Selena, she is super fast, super strong, but she also does the archery thing. So, and it's supernaturally good at that as well, right?
Yeah, and they also seem to have some sort of like other power, like she's the bringer of doubt. That's kind of like her, I don't know, nickname. I don't know. It's like her thing is she's the bringer of doubt. I don't know how to put a title on what that is, but she can make people around her doubt themselves and their beliefs and stuff like that. So they also seem to have this other, I don't know, arcana power on top of their...
No, you're right, because although Evie does the plant thing, right? She also...
she has the poison.
It's the poison, but like it's her whole come touch, but you'll pay a price. She has like a luring, like like layered on top. Like, so it's like, okay, so there's the bringer of doubt, and then she's like,
she can have people kind of become infatuated with her. She can induce a sense of infatuation that people are drawn to her. At the end of Poison Princess, we're left with a few questions. And one thing I will say, being a few books in, is that a lot of the questions that you kind of have at the end of one book, a lot of them get answered within the next book or the next few books. We know the answers to these questions, so we're not necessarily going to like try and guess them because we know the answers. But for someone, if you are someone who's kind of, this is where you're at in reading the Arcana Chronicles, you might be wondering things like, why are the women hit harder than the men? Which we've already kind of mentioned. And I guess we don't know the answer to that one.
I just wanted to mention that we haven't talked about Death yet. And he is a voice that is very prominent in Evie's head. And he kind of taunts her throughout this whole story. So another question we're kind of left with is like, why is Death sort of singling Evie out with his, I want to say, bullying, but it's like worse than that because he's like, I'm going to kill you.
No, he's very much targeting her. Evie's, at this point in the story, super struggling with the fact that she and the Red Witch are one and the same, that the Red Witch is like her power. So kind of how that is going to play out as the story progresses, how much she's going to embrace that side of her.
So can she embrace it and still be Evie, or will she transform into something unrecognizable?
Because when she's a Red Witch, like when she's Evie, she's blonde, blue-eyed. When she is the Red Witch, she has red hair. She
physically transforms.
Yeah, she has red hair, and she gets these like almost like tattoos. They're called glyphs, I think.
Yeah, the glyphs.
All over her body. Which she can be Evie and have the glyphs, but when she's the Red Witch, they're like, it's like actually vines on her. Where what I picture when she's Evie is it's more like a glimmery tattoo. And then when she transforms, they become like a more tangible vine.
The Red Witch sounds very cool in a slithery kind of way. It almost gives like Enchantress, but instead of black smoke, like plants, like
yeah. And one thing I was like super questioning, because at the end of this story, Evie kills the hermit, and I was like, what happens when they die? Because we know it's a cycle. So I'm like, how do they come back?
Yes, very interesting to contemplate.
And I think what the explanation ends up being is really cool and really intriguing.
Yes, it is. Well, I think that's all we have today for you for Poison Princess. We hope you enjoyed our discussion and our first episode regarding the Arcana Chronicles series. We are super excited to dive deeper into the series as we continue to read more about Evie and Jack.
In our next episode, we will be discussing the second book in the Arcana Chronicles, Endless Night. So thanks again, and we hope to see you then.
Bye-bye for now.